listeners, and welcome to High Tea Mystique with your hosts, Kat.
And I'm Tess.
And Pam.
In a world changing faster than the time it takes to brew a cup of tea,
High Tea Mystique reminds you that no experience is too big or too small to teach us something about ourselves. So join us for a cup of tea as we steep into adulting, womanhood, independence, and more.
Yeah. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, the Biltmore tea experience was definitely nice.
Yes, we must go.
We do it in costume and get a photo shoot.
That's right.
Wait. That they have that? Or
No, I'm
that's something
saying
that
we
we
should.
would do separately? Because I did
We
do
would
that
do.
in middle school when I went. I wore pearls
Aw.
and everything, 1920s. So we're
We
going to
should
do that as well.
separately. Yes.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, when I went with Pam, it was actually also kind of dressing up because it was before the premiere of the Down Abbey movie.
Yes.
And
Oh, that's so perfect.
and Kat, the amount of people who also had that plan was insane. Like we literally, as a mass community, moved from the Biltmore in the Gables to
Theater.
to the theater, like the Gables
The art cinema?
art cinema. It was insane. We were like, oh my god, we're all just moving from point A to point B. It was
That's so
great.
funny. Like you guys have a really good coordinated planner in your group too.
Who was
Yeah.
that?
Who brought it together? It was Isabel,
Bless her.
the librarian. The librarian did it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Who done it? The librarian.
The librarian.
It's not the butler anymore. It's the librarian.
Yeah.
The tea room.
In the tea room.
With a scone.
With the scone.
Scones
Oh
can
my
get very
goodness.
hard after a day or two.
That's true. Murder weapon.
Gotta watch out. Yeah.
Easily.
Ruh-roh.
Ruh-roh. Ruh-roh, Raggy.
In cahoots with the baker.
Well, as much as I love murder mystery, welcome to High Tea Mystique. This
We're
is an
very
episode.
menacing.
We're recording? Yes, we're recording. Welcome, listeners. Welcome, friends. Welcome, newcomers. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm Tess. I'm joined by Kat. Say hey.
Hello. How are you
Hello.
guys?
I'm joined with Pam. Say hey.
Oops. Hello. It was my turn now. You're the first part and I just jumped
This
in.
is live.
Ruh-roh.
Ruh-roh. And I'm your host today, Tess. Hello. I think what's so unique about our podcast is our own individual experiences, to put it plainly, what we bring to the table every day. And I think it's kind of a moment right now to pay homage to something that we all share, regardless of our individual experiences. And that would be growing up in South Florida. And I think, ironically, because we are, in a very tumultuous season, right, of the natural systems, the Atlantic Ocean, and its, meddlings there in the middle of the ocean, we are in the hurricane season. And I thought it was really unique and challenging a little bit for us today to think about, what has it actually meant to grow up here? What has it actually meant to live through these experiences that are brought on by very severe circumstances, right? And maybe some of us didn't feel it at all, right? So I know we all have like a spectrum, of reaction and feeling. So we've always divulged that with like very kind of, very difficult, very vulnerable moments. And now there's kind of the challenge of how are we going to divulge and share with you all, right, the authenticity of something that's very in your face, right? There's no denying that a natural disaster occurred, right? But what does it really mean for the people who have lived there to have survived it, right? I know Miami hurricane culture is such a it's such an internet fun joke, right? I mean, you tell me guys, I don't know how many times I've seen memes of like hurricane
Hurricane parties.
barbecues. Yes. Yes, right? Hurricane parties, whether it's like people don't care at all or people care too much and then we're out of toilet paper all of a sudden, right? And I think that's kind of the outward image, right? And it'd be interesting just amongst us today to find out how much of that is true, how much of that maybe was true but felt different, right? From somebody being on the in, right? And maybe even beyond just talking about natural disasters and inviting us to be maybe a little bit less literal, right? What has a storm really felt like in your eyes, right? In your mind, from your earliest storm to your most recent one. So that's the topic today. Um, and I know that our topic is always accompanied and in good company with teas. And I know we're all drinking our own individual teas, so I guess I'll let Kat start with her tea today, and then we'll go around and share what we're each drinking.
Why, thank you for allowing me to start the conversation about tea. Hi, everybody. I already said hi, but it's great to be back on the pod with you all, even if we're not here together in person for this episode. But it's always nice to get together with these ladies and rediscover and also newly discover different parts of myself. So today's tea for me is a warm rooibos blend. I think we've had this tea before. This is my fitness blend that I got from a local farmers market called Monde Peace. So like Spice World, and it has rooibos, lemongrass. There's also bits of lavender, rose hips, and ultimately, I'm having it because I did just have a run before we started recording, and so just a little something to ease myself. I'm already going to be nice and cozy for the episode, so I think that that is the best remedy for a post workout. But it's nice to have something inside of my body too, nice and warm, keeping me nice and cozy. So can't stress enough how rooibos is the best tea to have after workouts, and that just a reminder that you can use it topically as well.
Nice. I was actually thinking about a rooibos today. I had it. I had it in my little tea file, and I saw it, and I was like, maybe. But I didn't do it only because another one jumped out at me today, and I guess I'll go ahead and share mine. I'll also be very quick and sweet about it. We've talked about this ingredient before, so nothing new. But I quite simply chose ginger because I think I really needed it. It has been a very stressful day of work, so I needed the support from my gut. I needed the support from my immune system. Just overall, I am happy with my choice, right? I love ginger. I love its spice. I love its warmth because honestly, I think the warmth in tea is always the best. But with ginger, with chai, with cinnamon, there's just an extra layer of hug that I feel. So that's my accompaniment today for our episode. Um, and that's my tea. So thanks, guys. And finally, our last tea drinker.
Hello. So I was trying to find some stuff about my tea because I know very little. But the tea that I am drinking today is nettle. And just based off like a quick search, it says that it's been used for hundreds of years to treat, painful muscles and joints, eczema, arthritis, gout, and anemia, apparently, and that they use it also to treat urinary problems. Um, but if any of you play video games, you also might notice the name is used a lot when you're trying to heal yourself. So I feel like I've been wanting to have this tea for a really long time, just to really understand its healing properties. Because when something gets translated into a video game, like that shows me how powerful, that message is, and it's always associated with healing something. So I was like, oh, I want to try. I bought the pack, and I've been wanting to drink it more often, and so I thought tonight would be the perfect night to start drinking it a little bit more.
Nice. I love that you have settled into nettle.
Off the cuff. What's one of the games that you've seen it in? I'm curious to know if it's like oh shoot. The Disney one? Kingdom of Hearts?
No, not
There's
that one.
fairies. Okay.
But in this, it's a game that's kind of like the play style is a turn-based, almost like a board game. It's called For the King, and nettle is the plant that you use to heal yourself hit points.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's super cool because that's actually you said medieval times?
Yeah.
So it's historical.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Very cool.
Yes.
Yeah. I love when games teach us things so much.
Mm-hmm.
It's my best. So now that we have our teas covered, you know what our partners are today, right? You know what's fueling our conversation. And we hope that you grab one for yourself too. And tell us about it if you'd like. We're all up for taking tea recommendations. Yes, I love knowing about, and just like, I feel like Kat has given us so much knowledge about teas. I'm always loving when someone shares a tea, an herb, something that they just can't live without, because it's just more knowledge and it's just more comfort, right? That I get to inherit from somebody and then apply it to myself. So super excited. And obviously, we're awaiting any tea recommendations that maybe we'll have on the show in the future. So watch out. But without
Just
further ado, oh, yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I just wanted to shout out Kat and I's mugs today. She has like a cat mug, and I have a dog mug.
Cat mug, dog
At
mug.
both ends of this screen.
Same
Yeah.
but different.
Mhm.
Same but different.
I might like Pam's more. I'm also drinking my tea out of my narwhal steeper.
Oh
Yeah,
my
you've
god.
seen him before, but he's making a reappearance
Narwhal.
tonight. And then
cute.
some ASMR.
The water
No,
drops.
you'll hear it in post.
We don't have those microphones yet. Soon.
Not
Soon.
yet.
Not yet. Fun fact, I did not know that narwhals were a real animal.
There aren't many, but they are real.
I
Mhm.
thought they were like as
Unicorns.
yeah, I thought they were as mythical as like unicorns. Yeah.
Well, I guess
It
they also are. But it's not your fault, Tess.
Thank you.
They're
Thank
in
you.
both worlds.
Unicorn of the sea, you might say, you know. So there's that. Anyway, uh without any other distraction and fun mug stuff. um we are diving into, again, a kind of challenge of memory, a challenge of place, a challenge of, how are we bringing those memories and places with us every day. So let's get a little concrete about it. I'd love to ask you both, what was the earliest hurricane you remember, which is part A of this question. Part B of this question is, what was the most recent hurricane you remember that kind of uh, impacted, whether it be just it hit us or it didn't hit us, or it ruined your day, or or maybe for some of us we have more substance, in part A or part B of that question. So to give you guys, right, some time to think about that, I definitely have an answer ready. So I'll go ahead and divulge that. The earliest hurricane that I remember was, quite honestly, Hurricane Katrina. And that's kind of cheating because technically the earliest hurricane I remember, but I didn't live through it, was Hurricane Andrew. So much of my family spoke about Andrew. And like so much of my family had stories about Andrew. They were so affected by Andrew. And honestly, that's the hurricane that feels like the most impactful for me as like early back as I can remember, just because of how much came from it. You know, my aunt would joke that my mom was pregnant with my brother during Hurricane Andrew, and everyone was joking, you have to name him Andrew because Hurricane Andrew, if he's born, he has to be named Andrew because he was kind of due around that time. And I know we just celebrated an anniversary not too long ago of Hurricane Andrew, so we're in kind of that season, right, of history for Miami. Um, but yeah, there was so much story, so much tragedy, so much felt, from Andrew. And honestly, it was because Hurricane Katrina had also become such a threat, right? A lot of people were comparing Andrew to Katrina. So I feel like Katrina was my Andrew until it did what it did and kind of swerved around Florida and then just went to Louisiana. So we didn't really even feel it that much. But there was a lot of fear surrounding Katrina for me. Um, and I think, honestly, the last one that I remember is the one who just recently, skid by, right, South Florida recently, and that's Hurricane Ernesto. And I will never forget this storm because it has quite literally been the most chaotic storm I've ever read about in my life. It was trajected to hit us. And then it made a full, like almost 180 curve, went further, like up west to or up the eastern coast, affected the Carolinas a little bit, and then decided I'm going back to the Atlantic. And just decided to target, Great Britain for some reason and just go like cross the pond into, the other side. So that storm, I think, is the definition of chaotic neutral. It just doesn't care. It's aiming for all the continents.
That's such a villain story.
Yes, Ernesto. Who would have thought?
That is so crazy. I can go next. I love this question because I think if you were to ask me the hurricane that stands out the most, I would also say same year but Wilma. But I the earliest one I remember is just a year before, and the story behind it is something that I don't think about as often, but it really does grab me. And it was Hurricane Ivan, and my younger sister. I have two younger sisters, and the older one of the two had just been born in 2004. And at the time of the hurricane, she was just a few months old. She was born in April, and the hurricane came in August, September. And it was a bad storm. It we My family has always been the people that, honestly, they're not the people that you're gonna get pissed off at the supermarket for like clearing everything dry, but they are the ones who have like an emergency pantry. So like you won't be pissed at them in hurricane season, but you'll be wondering why they're buying so many canned goods and toilet and paper items, like in February because it's BOGO week after week. Anyway, so it was a bad hurricane, and this was the year that my family decided to get a generator because they didn't have one. Not many people did, honestly, at this time. It was the Katrina and Wilma, I think, that really made that turnover for a lot of people. I'm guessing I couldn't really speak on it, but I'm guessing the history between Andrew and then was like not a big advancement technologically for a lot of people. So my family had to get a generator because my sister came down with the flu and the power went out. and she was on a respirator, like something for babies, because the flu was giving her a respiratory illness. And uh shoot, I'm trying to remember like what it was called that she had. Uh but it was terrifying. So like the power was out and my entire family was just so focused on my little sister. And what may have been maybe 4 days felt like an eternity because it was literally just about like keeping her okay. And and yeah, and like that's when my family got the generator because they needed to hook up her system, and heating up her formula and like doing all of the things that you need to do when you care for an infant. And I was 9. So all of this was very, very new to me, but also like I had wanted a sister for my whole life, so it meant the world to all of us for her to just be okay. And then at the same time, like it's so hot, so no one can really be around her because she needs her space, I guess to paint the picture, like the biggest thing about hurricanes and why they're so like why the experience is so unpredictable is because it has everything to do with where you live. Like location is everything. There are different zones, whether or not your cable like your power cables are above or below ground. And when we were growing up, most of them were above ground, so it makes like the implications of a hurricane so much worse because it's lightning and thunder and flooding, right? So if you're in an area prone to flooding, like it's going to happen every single storm you get. It might not even be a hurricane, for you to experience flooding in your area. And so cable lines were down, and power can't just come back on when cable lines are down for your entire zip code and the 3 next to it. And so it's a game of not knowing when life will return back to normal. And then maybe your power comes back on, but you still can't go to a majority of the stores in your area. You still can't get gas at the gas stations, so maybe you're the lucky one who spared it. But everything else around you is completely uprooted. And I definitely saw all of that as a kid, just walking the block of the neighborhood afterwards. But I would say that memory in 2004 was definitely my earliest one of it, and it was mostly in my house, just surrounded around my baby sister and kind of like what were we going to do about it, and then a lot of phone calls or like house visits about getting that generator, and like how it was going to be so expensive, but oh, it's worth it, and this, that, and the other, and is it even going to be able to power the whole house? Would we need to get two? Like what rooms are important, right? Like all of these little discussions hearing as a kid and just not understanding how like it was a big investment, but the safety and security that it gave us for the following year, not knowing what was going to be coming to our home, is insane to think about now. Yeah. And then I guess the latest hurricane that I can think of with a story worth sharing was when Hurricane Irma came into town. I was in college. This was like 2000. Oh,
I'll look up the year for you right now.
thanks. I want to say 2017. I think I was
It
a
was
sophomore.
actually, it was 2017. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So yeah, so it's 2017. It was Hurricane Irma, and I was living in Little Havana at the time. I'm not very far from Little Havana now, but where I lived was considered a flood zone. And then I knew just from the history that like the homes in Little Havana, a lot of them you were either living in the original home or you were living in a home because the home had been flooded or it had been like or there was a fire that came over that area of the city many, many years ago, and perhaps that home previously was affected by the fire. But the other option was flooding, like that the home was flooded, and so like there's damage, and my home was already took steps to get up there. It was technically like elevated, and I was terrified. I had really bad windows. Our landlords, property managers were completely useless and did not give us anything that we needed. It was like a mission and a half to get them to bring us shutters, and it wasn't enough shutters for our entire house, which is like, that's, anyway. So it was a very stressful situation because in order for us to put up the shutters, we needed a specific type of screw. So I had to go to Home Depot in the height of knowing that a hurricane was coming for Miami. And so I couldn't find the screws. They didn't have any screws. So I like reached out to people to ask where I could find these screws so that I could gather as many of them as possible so that I could put up the shutters on my home, because it was the only source of protection that we could have, because we obviously no generator. I already know that the power is going to go out here because it's cable lines everywhere. You know, it's Little Havana. And on top of that, my neighbors, you know, like people who have so many things outside of their home and so many like junk cars and junk car pieces. And just like, there's nothing that I can do about any of that, like impacting my home. So, needless to say, we had I think it might have been my boyfriend's dad, like came through after putting up all of his shutters, of course. And he came through and he brought over like just enough screws to put boards on the front windows of our house, and everything else was completely exposed. So in my attempt to protect what I had, I just this is my thinking at the time. I put all of my stuff in the middle of my room. I took up my carpet and I put all of my clothing in garbage bags. Just like bagged it up and then threw it all on top of the bed and was kind of like, well, if it's just flooding, like I made a little island, and then maybe the things will survive on the little island. Maybe not, but I don't know. If the roof goes, well, that's it. And so I ended up not staying in my home for the storm. I went down to Kendall, where it was nice and concrete and structured, and it was a nice townhome. So it was like a building for 5 families. And I waited out the storm there. And the power did still go out. There was no generator. Things weren't the best. But when I went back to my neighborhood after the storm, my house was okay, thank God. But the street was destroyed, and it was very clear that there was so much flooding in the area. And I just remember that storm because it was the first time that I experienced it in a home, aside from being a kid, because I always lived in an apartment, which was exactly where I went to ride out the storm. You know, like I felt so much safer in a multi-family area than I did in that standalone home. It was like really scary. And there was a chimney in that home, you know, and a fireplace. So I was even wondering, like, how are we going to close that thing? Like, they're not supposed to be closed, but if you know that you're going to be like pelted with rain and potentially wind, I was like, we just can't stay here. Like, I don't know how to take care of this home, and obviously renting. And so, yeah, that was quite an interesting turn of events, because obviously nothing crazy happened, but like I said, I know that if I would have stayed there for that storm, it would have been a really scary experience.
Curious what happened with the chimney. Did it let in water?
Yeah, it did, but it wasn't like our house didn't flood,
Okay.
you know. And I wonder, like, since we never really understood what was happening in that chimney, uh if it might have been partially closed. You know, we
Oh,
never lit
yeah.
a fire or anything like that. Like, no.
Mm, yeah.
Who would in Miami?
I
Yeah, no,
know.
all we did was during Christmas, I always get extra branches to like decorate around the home and make it smell like evergreen everywhere. And I would put a couple in the fireplace, but I wouldn't
Hmm.
burn them. That was the extent of wood under that thing.
Yeah. I feel like my memories with hurricanes is really bad. And it's definitely what Kat said, right? Like it's really heavily dependent on your location. And I feel like my family has been fortunate enough to live in an area that hasn't had the worst of a hurricane, you know? Because I'm also in the Kendall area, and like how Kat said, there's a lot of multifamily townhomes, concrete homes here that are relatively close by that I feel like add to the protection. My home is one of the places that my aunt will come to, you know, because she for most of her life would be in an apartment, and so she would come to be with us to weather storms. So as far as my earliest memory of a hurricane, I cannot remember which one it was, but I do remember that there was one that affected one of my close family friends. Like they had a trailer home, you know, and so their home was completely destroyed. with that storm. And I could not tell you the year. Maybe I was in middle school, maybe I was in fifth grade, so it could have been one of the ones that we've mentioned, already. But I do remember seeing, like the devastation they felt, the crying, that sense of loss, and like, what do we do now? And I think I was still little enough at the time to not really process and understand exactly what was going on, and as we've mentioned before in this podcast, um, I love my parents, but there was not a lot of explanations for certain things. Um, and so I feel like that's maybe another reason why I don't really have a lot of early memories of hurricanes, because it was just we all stayed at the house. If anything, I would see it as like, oh, I don't have to go to school, and we're just at home and we're all like, I don't know, hanging out. And so because we didn't have anything terrible, like I think the worst that we may have gotten is maybe no power, but only forever, like a few days, never anything too terrible, like a week. And then my most recent memory of a hurricane happened when I wasn't here because I was in Japan between 2016 and 2018. And the one the cat was talking about, Irma, that's the one from 2017, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that one. As someone who was from Florida, no longer living there, but having family there, and seeing the size, the behemoth that storm was, it literally covered the entirety of the peninsula of Florida. And having to see that, and like the tracking and the projections that they had for it, it's like it didn't matter where it went, it was so big, it was going to hit everybody that I knew, and that one I remembered, it was really stressful to live through, because my parents, I would be talking to them, asking them what's going on, are they okay? They had to, they felt it was big and threatening enough to even leave Miami. They tried to drive all the way to Orlando, felt like they had to drive past Orlando. And so they were a part of those people who were trying to leave the state and escape the hurricane. And they were the ones who really lived and endured, the traffic, the crazy, trying to buy for gas just to get out. And then it felt like anywhere they went, they still, there was no avoiding that hurricane. And my sister at that time had her dogs. It was them trying to seek shelter with a dog. And I think they ended up staying in a hotel somewhere that allowed dogs. And so they had like pee pads inside, and it was like a really big place where they had like other friends there. So it was nice that they had other people that they could be with if anything went pretty terribly. Luckily, there was no damage to our homes and everything worked out. But I remember just like the helplessness that you feel, like having lived in Florida your whole life. Yeah, we've had like her level 5 hurricanes in the past, but never of this size, you know. Um and so having to kind of experience that without living it, and just be in worry for those that you care about, it was really stressful. Like I can't even, I couldn't even say it or compare it if it was more stressful than the people living in it, but just the helplessness that you kind of feel. And then, you know, the Japanese teachers, colleagues of mine at that time, they were trying to be very kind and considerate and asked me about it, but like honestly it was, I just had more stress. I'm like, yes, I know about this, I've seen the hurricane, I could not tell you if my family's okay. They're trying to flee the hurricane right now, but everything that we're seeing, so they did their best. But that is the most distinct memory that I have of a hurricane that I can recall, just because of the high stress. I feel like the other ones that we've gone through, because of where I live, the most I feel like that we've experienced was some flooding, but even then they usually didn't last past like a day or two.
And it's interesting because I know, so just to add some type of context to what we're talking about, location, just to compare, right? If you lived, like for example, I remember being very, very scared about Irma, right? And I was here, right? And I remember asking my brother, like, maybe we should leave. And, we're gonna get flooded, the house is gonna get flooded. And I remember very distinctly that he said, look, the neighborhood is going to be fine. We are not going to get flooded. Look, I'm going to drive through our neighborhood and we're going to go across the street and we're going to cross, we went from like pre Core Gables to more Shenandoah, right? Silver Bluff area. And even then, the elevation is very minimal. Like the difference is very minimal, but you see it when the rain hits, right? And I think I paid more attention to it because he purposefully like drove me through the neighborhoods and he was like, look, we're at an uphill. So that means the water is going to drop away from us, right? The houses that have to worry are the houses that are in line with the downhill, right? So that's really complicated for someone who doesn't live in Florida. Really, for someone who doesn't live in Miami, because I feel like elevation is a little bit more obvious when housing is spread apart, right? I feel like people can kind of tell the difference a little bit easier when you're in like Orlando or Kissimmee or, St. Cloud. But literally, the houses are packed on each other in Miami. Like neighborhoods very smoothly like go into one another to the point that almost nobody wants to distinguish in them anymore. It's just all Miami. But the elevation, the plan, it's there, right? Whereas like if you're driving around Kendall, that's very different from driving around even in Florida City, right? Which you could argue are two southern regions of the Dade County area, but the infrastructure is very different, and that greatly affects, right, who's getting flooded, who's getting impacted, right? I remember being so terrified of Irma because of how much context I had from Andrew and how, I mean, Kat, like, I don't know how many times we heard on the news that year, we have our Andrew, it's our second Andrew. Like they were comparing Irma to Andrew every day. They were quite literally saying this is worse than Andrew. Sometimes they were saying this is going to be less than Andrew. It was insane, and I remember being terrified. And I had no idea because I was like, well, I guess my parents survived this, but I don't know if we will because there was so much, I guess, like hot news coming out that was either, telling you it was going to be worse and some people telling you it was going to be less, right? Um, yeah, that was probably a hard one. And also, right, I was looking up the fact that a lot of our hurricanes that we remember and we just spoke about kind of all happened in the same year. They all happened in 2004, especially the ones from our childhood. So I feel like 2004 was literally the year of Hurricane Ivan, Hurricane Katrina, and Hurricane Wilma. All of those hit in 2004. So
I
that
thought
was
Wilma
crazy.
was 2005.
Let me see. Am I saying 2004 and I mean 2005? Probably.
Ivan was 2004,
There you go. Yes. But
but it was a
Kat-
crazy year
yeah.
to
And then
have two
Katrina.
major hurricanes back to back in the same area.
Yeah. And then Katrina and Wilma were 2005. They were back to back.
Yeah.
And those were 2 years back to back of like really significant storms.
Well, when you talk about the culture of people living in Miami, it is very much so like that. If you survived one, you can survive them all, and nothing can be worse than what just happened. So I think it was probably just added to the shock of why it hit so hard, why Wilma hit so hard, because it was like everyone was preparing for Katrina. Then Katrina didn't hit, so everyone was like, okay, we'll be fine, we'll be fine. Because there were still a bunch of storms between Katrina and Wilma. It was
Yes.
it was bad weather. It was bad weather all season. And so when Wilma came, there was already a lot of residual damage in the city that like Wilma just didn't Miami didn't stand a chance against Wilma. And I remember the storm that was Wilma. I remember like being petrified. I remember having to move from family home to family home because the power just kept going out, and like 5 households being in one house because it was the only house that had power. I remember all that. I remember calling my friends because we were out of school for 3 weeks and school had like just started. We spent like 3 days with each other, and
Yep.
then just kind of talking and like having nothing really to talk about except for like what you saw in your walk around the neighborhood that day.
Yeah. All early September. So that's, well, actually, with the exception of Hurricane Katrina, 'cause Hurricane Katrina basically happened around this time, like the last week of August. I think what's also interesting about that is like as a kid, I would always think of Wilma as the hurricane of wind because I was living in Coconut Grove at the time, and I can't tell you that I remember anything else but the wind that Wilma brought in. Like that wind was insane. It took down the entire front awning of my house. And those were like big metal beams. And I remember when it broke off, and my dad was just like looking outside of our sliding door, and he was like, because the wind was having it move, swing back and forth, and my dad was like, like moving away from the window, having us go downstairs, having us go into the bathroom because he was so afraid that it was going to hit the house and just burst the sliding doors and just basically lose the whole half of that house.
Yeah, I mean, it was a possibility.
It was,
If it happened the wrong way.
Mm-hmm. And we kind of explored very much some really concrete and specific ideas of disaster, right? And I'm wondering, right, after divulging a little bit of this, when the word hurricane comes to your mind, right? Do you think it's changed very significantly from when you thought of it as a child? Has it kind of stayed the same, right? Or has it evolved? Has it gotten more serious? Has it gotten less serious? Tell us how that happened, right? What do you guys think?
I'll start. I feel like when I was little, there was a lot more. I don't feel like this is the right word, but I can't think of another word to describe it. Almost like a fantastical thing about it, you know? Um, because these were things that I didn't know about as a kid, like like the things that you have to do to prepare, and just seeing the craziness that is adults rushing to buy emergency goods, right? Or the anticipation of waiting to see if school is out, and not really truly understanding what that reality translated to. That it's school's out not because, oh, we're closing school to have a good time. Like, no, this is a really bad storm and we're closing it for your protection. And I feel like now it's definitely something that's evolved into less fantastical, more serious, right? Because I have more experience with hurricanes as I've gotten older, and I understand what are some of the things that we have to do to prepare. I feel like for the most part, Miami's infrastructure has done a better job to prepare us for storms, right? Whether it be preparing us with shutters or new homes having hurricane proof windows or impact windows, things like that. Um, I feel like now, also, when I think of the word hurricane, I have more worry in my own security in terms of, now that I'm older, I work. And so with school, it was very clear where the line was drawn for kids to be taken out of school and just stay at home. Whereas work, you're kind of waiting. And even though I work in education, there's still, as like the employee versus the student, right? You're still in that kind of dance of, do I come in, do I not, should I even come in if they're making me come in, like how safe is that commute going to be with the amount of people that are panicking, with the amount of water that's flooding the streets. And I have a pretty far commute to where I go to work. And even when I think about my employment prior to higher ed, when I worked retail, right? That was even worse. Any retail, food industry, anything like that, that you're clocking in hourly, because the expectation is you go, and you would only know at the very last second, like maybe 5 minutes before your shift would start, if you shouldn't come in anymore. So I feel like as I've gotten older, there's been more, I don't want to say fear, but the reality has definitely sunk in of the complexity and the depth, right, of what it means for us to experience a hurricane and all of the different elements that go into it. Like, now that I work, I have to make sure I actually get my own gas, and prepare that and try to do that in anticipation without all these people going crazy. Now that I work and I contribute to my family, like making sure that I help out in preparing those emergency supplies. And so it's a lot more responsibility, that I feel like has also grown and evolved from that fantastical what's going to happen, when will I not have school, to now understanding the reality of, okay, like I either have to put my foot down at work and say, no, for my own personal well-being, I will be staying home, you know, or whether it be like even sometimes having my parents understand, like, no, we have to take this a little bit more seriously, or it may not be as, because they've gone through more hurricanes than I have, so they're probably a lot more accustomed to I guess, feeling which ones are the ones they should be better prepared for. I also think it's also an interesting evolution, because now that we have social media and people are watching live TV less and are transferring or focusing more on streaming, I find that more people around me are less aware of hurricanes actually going on. Like, we don't, there have been so many times in the past 2, 3 years, right, that I'll be with friends or something, or I'll even coming home from work and I'm like, wow, it's raining pretty bad. And then all of a sudden, when I'm looking it up, oh, there was a tropical storm that was coming, and that no one's aware of, because we're not watching live TV like that anymore, especially the weather. We just look at our phones on the app and be like, oh, is it raining? It's not raining, but it doesn't tell you there's a tropical storm warning or a tropical depression warning, nothing. It'll tell you if it's a hurricane, but by that point, it's kind of like a little too late, because it's not actual weather forecast of there's this big storm. It's just, it's raining right now. Why? Because of a tropical storm or a hurricane.
The 30% chance that it's already raining.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's a good point you bring up about streaming and how that's kind of changed the reaction time to hurricanes, because I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that has definitely been delayed. I don't see as many people rushing to Publix or Winn-Dixie or Walmart, and they're buying cases and cases of water, right? I think there are some old-fashioned Miamians out there that just still do it around the same time just because they know, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're doing it just because it's like, oh, it's July, gotta get ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my grandparents. And I'm sure they would still be doing it to this day if they could. I feel like the theme that stands out to me is where my respect has gone. I think that when I was younger, I didn't respect the hurricane itself. I respected my elders and their view of the hurricane. Therefore, I saw it as important as my family saw it, So when they took the storm seriously, I knew that, and I trusted that it was worth taking seriously, that it was going to be a bad one, that I should be afraid, that I should be scared, because if my uncle is scared, if my uncle is telling me to be prepared and to stay safe, like then this must really be something that's about to happen that I'm going to have to endure. And I think that I held that mentality for through middle school for sure. I think in high school, I being the eldest in the household, uh, did kind of force me to grow up in certain areas. So I was helping the family, with like any storms that came by. We didn't have anything major while we were in high school, thank God. But but yeah, like I would help with hurricane prep. Um but I think it was again really when I was independent and I started having to like learn all of these things myself for the first time and understanding that my family had dumbed a lot of things down with the example of like the shutters are installed on the house all year round. So there's nothing to like put in there. I think they're called butterfly shutters, accordion shutters. That's what it is. And so like
Accordion, yeah.
we just have to close it up like a book,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and then put in the locks and then later in life, my partner JP, his family did the same thing. So like it's easy for us to help them get the house ready for hurricanes because they've already taken those necessary steps to make it as easy as possible. Um, but if there's one thing that I've learned as an adult, from the unfortunate stories of others and uh I guess also like being somebody who loves being outdoors, and like adventuring and exploring as much as possible, you recognize that Mother Nature is a genuine factor. And unrelated but related thing is like I have never gone camping in the snow because I recognize that that's something that is probably the farthest from what I am naturally suited for as somebody who was raised in the tropical and Caribbean climate. So that's me recognizing that like I respect Mother Nature, and I know that I can't just walk into certain situations. And I would say that it came from recognizing as an adult, like hurricanes are not something to be are they're not something to throw a party, like during that time. Have I done that in the past? Yes, I have. I've been the host of a hurricane party, again, like as a young adult, like with these opportunities, and that this was something fun that you can do, and like sure, maybe nothing happened. It's just not where my mentality is anymore, and I wouldn't recommend for other people to do it. I don't think it gets you anywhere, and also it's because you have no idea what can happen, and so I echo everything that Pam said. Like, if your city and state officials are making closures in your area, like, there's a reason for that. I remember when I was working in a restaurant, I serviced this one woman. I I was going to the table, she was on the phone. It was a very odd table, but ultimately she was from California looking to move to Miami. She starts crying to me. She starts crying to me about how she is so terrified of moving to Miami because of the hurricanes and how she just doesn't know if she can do it. And that she has earthquakes in California, but hurricanes are just so different, and they're so treacherous, and what we experience here is unlike anything else anywhere else in the world. And I'm hearing her say all of these things, and then I say back to her and I was like, yeah, but that's interesting because you guys have earthquakes and like you don't even know when they're coming. Like they just can come at any time out of nowhere. And she was like, and I was like, with hurricanes, like we know a week in advance at the least. Like that'd be the craziest thing if something really pops out of nowhere like that. And so and honestly, like I said that to her and she was like tears in her eyes, like still like not moved by it in any way, because it wasn't about the timing before, it was about living through something you haven't experienced yet. And so if there's anything that I can say, it's the fear, right, of every hurricane is different. It affects different things, and you never know uh what it's going to do to you, and talk about the loved ones, like there's everyone is living through the same storm, and it's your city, like so many friends and family, and we're all in different areas. So you will have people who live in a flood zone, and you'll be thinking about them during the storm and hoping that they're okay, because you're going to hear on the news, because maybe we don't watch live TV, but when we're in the middle of a storm, it's literally all that we can have. And you might hear an area, that will make you think of somebody. And so the respect for sure, it's really transferred, less still respecting my elders, but with regards to this, like with regards to storms, less on what I'm hearing and more on just the storm itself is worthy of respect.
Yeah, I think honestly, uh when I was a kid, hurricanes, rainstorms, they kind of felt the same to me. I think for me, hurricanes felt like rainstorms with a lot more wind, and that was the biggest difference. And I can also say and be very transparent that I feel like as a child, I was really giddy, about like rain, and I felt the same way about hurricanes, like I still get giddy about rain today. Honestly, I'm like, yay, it's raining. I'm automatically relaxed. I want to be home. I feel better. But with hurricanes, I kind of had that same giddiness because of what you just said, Kat, because it's like, it's different. We don't know what's going to happen. And as a kid, I can tell you that fueled a lot of my giddiness. And I kind of looked at hurricanes like, ooh, it's a surprise. We don't know what's going to happen. I don't have to go to school. I get to see it all from my home, you know? And and I think that drastically changed. Um, I mean, it was kind of a two-parter, right? Like, I think the first part definitely living when like the aftermath of Hurricane Wilma. Because I can tell you that there's memories of me. Like my dad was scared, right, of the whole glass thing and breaking the house, but I was like, woohoo! I was like right by the sliding door window, looking at the wind. I was like, oh my god, I was very just like, I guess, kind of starstruck by how much was happening outside, you know, and um, but afterwards, it was losing the power. It was everyone in my block losing power. And then it was, not having power for almost 3 weeks afterwards. And I I couldn't tell you like how much that scared me, especially after Wilma. I lived in a condominium of townhouses at the time. It was my dad, myself, and my brother. And I think the only other person that we took shelter in, but not even during the storm. Like we just went to her home after the storm was my grandmother, and she lived nearby, and that was it, right? It was like a point A and point B commute. And then that's when the shift kind of changed because it was really severe. Just hearing about and really living through the darkness of those streets and like how much people were kind of just suffering at home, whether it be they lost all their food from their fridge, they're, having to be hospitalized just because of the lack of power and things that they need power for. It was the lack of like this kind of guidance of the grid, like we were all on this grid, this well-oiled grid for so long, and then it just snapped and like broke, and everybody was kind of this like aimless piece on the board, there was so much destruction, right? And I remember we were out of school for that long as well. Like we didn't go back to school for almost a month after the hurricane passed. And I remember that coming back to school was so relieving, and like it was that normalcy, yes, but of course they brought us back because the power came back at school, and they were, they had like generators powering it all, right? They had fans in the classrooms, and it was surreal, just like looking, across my table and being so thankful that like I was seeing familiar faces, but also kind of seeing the kind of exhaustion that was on their face because of what their family went through. And I remember just people talking about how, their grandmother lost their house and their grandmother's living with them now, or they lost their pet dog because it ran out into the storm, or they lost their pet cat because of the same issue. And it was just so much loss, and so much loss of like vagueness. Like nobody actually knew like of the death count, right? I don't think there was much death count with Hurricane Wilma, but there was so much just like things that were so steady and ever present just got, whooshed away. And you never saw them again, you know, whether it be a pet or just like the normalcy of, pre Wilma. And that kind of new fear of the break in normalcy and the vague black white area was just amplified with Irma, because it was something I hadn't experienced before. I don't think I had really taken seriously a category 5 hurricane until Wilma was like fast approaching. I can't remember how many times I tried to convince my brother, like maybe we should leave, maybe we should like, just board up the house and go. But I was outnumbered, so we didn't. um, but it was a really big shift from, oh my God, this is giddy, I don't know what's going to happen, to, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to lose because I don't know what's going to happen, right? There was such a strong shift to hurricanes are now really associated with loss for me, right? Something's going to give, something's going to break, something's going to go away and never come back. And I can't even explain it that's really happened to me, because it's not like I've lost a pet or anything, but that's what it feels like. you know Something is going to possibly hit us and disrupt you know the grid that we're all living on, and we have to kind of claim our new routine, right? Where we're going to find our food, where we're going to find our water, where we're going to get ice. I'll never forget making the line at the city hall of Miami for ice bags. That was insane. That was a whole day dedicated to waiting in line for 2 bags of ice. Yeah. Which kind of goes into this next question of, we have witnessed to a certain extent, right? We have survived. What does it feel like to have witnessed, to have survived, this event? How does it feel on the other end, coming out of these experiences, possibly preparing for another one, or possibly preparing for something else entirely different? Does anyone want to get started?
Yeah, I can start. I think that, well, I think uh, we love to say, oh, I hate to say it's a cliche. So I'll be the one to say it this episode, but I think what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is a very powerful message, especially when it comes to storms. And I remember you, Tess, giving us the green light to take things a little bit more ethereal when we think of that term of storm, and make it more broad, natural disaster. And something that I think I can say very literally I've experienced more in adulthood, when it comes to hurricanes, is that feeling of being invincible. I think that feeling of coming back to the house after the storm to see that while things may not be the same as they were before, everything is okay, and I'm okay. And sometimes I do feel stronger after it, especially the big ones. Um and I could say that for any storm, like those dark seasons of my life. I think that I might actually be in the middle, hopefully towards the end of one right now in my life. And it's like that feeling that you have to kind of resurface often to remind yourself of the many, many storms that you have experienced and lived through. Again, both literally and figuratively, uh, because our body and our spirits are really powerful. And so what they can outlive is part of my story. And so it's a reminder, like during those really tough times when you're kind of forced to just be present with where you're at, that you can almost like summon, like summon the energy and the courage that you've already given, without even realizing it in the moment, because I think courage is really just about experiencing it, and being present through it fully and recognizing that it is something that is there to shape you, because otherwise it wouldn't be there. And that when you don't look at life that way, life can just be scary, and you have to just face it head on, because it's going to be coming for you no matter whether you like it or not, and you can prepare, you can do all of these things, but at the end of the day, you still have to weather the storm. And I would say that that's a really valuable lesson. And as crazy as it is, uh, because it's inevitable, I think that there are still a lot of people who don't live life that way. I think there's still a lot of people who go about the world looking to avoid big problems, like looking to avoid confrontation or avoid getting the job because it's actually too scary for them, to reach that source of power that they for some reason feel in their gut, or not pursue the person of their dreams because they feel like they're not the person that person would want yet, and that they need to keep working to be that person. I feel like all of these are things that you could kind of take what we've said today and apply it to those scenarios too, because I think that it's the same level of like living on the edge, that you have to be at to embrace it.
Yeah. I think honestly, I love the idea of opening this up because of something that I said last episode, right? You with the conversation with Nicole, like we were definitely getting to this place where uh, one thing in my toolbox is what you just said, right? Like you survived something terrible, so you can do this, right? You and terrible, right? I do not think my Hawaii hike was terrible, but it was very difficult. It was extremely difficult. And I can see that this category of preparing for the hurricane, boarding up your windows, getting out there and putting, drilling into, our planks of wood to cover the windows, or those of us that are lucky enough to have shutters, shuttering the entire house, packing up, putting sandbags by the door. That is quite literally like preparations of war. And I think that is something that Floridians take for granted, even us, because we do it so often, and then we forget how much hard work that is, and that we do it to survive, to make us more protected, and we forget that we could do that for ourselves. So why can't we show up, for ourselves as well in others arenas of our lives, right? um so I love the idea of this like metaphysical space, of hurricanes and memories of natural disasters, quite literally turning into the toolbox to weather, right, all types of storms. Yeah.
Yeah, my answer, I was going along the same train of thought um as the both of you actually. Because when I think about you know, as Kat was talking, I was thinking about how hurricanes for me and just storms in general, um, how the literal has also manifested itself in the metaphysical, right? And this idea that a lot of the storms that I've weathered, whether it be physical or just challenges in my life, I feel like hurricane is a really accurate metaphor for it, because a lot of them have kind of been things that may have been projected or have been on that path for a while, right? And storms that I see coming, that either I choose to ignore, or I believe that maybe I'll get lucky and it'll wake that weird shift. And then even if it does, it comes right back, right? And I feel like hurricanes are a really good reminder for me. And even as we've been talking throughout this episode, like at the start of it, I was not really sure what I could contribute because my memory of hurricanes is very minimal. But when I think about it now, right after everything that we've talked about, I feel like it's such a perfect metaphor to some of my life experiences. And a lot of them are, it's things that have happened in my life that have revolved around the same theme. And they're things that I felt like, oh, I can prepare as much as I can, as we do for hurricanes, right? But at the end of the day, you'll never know what the reality of that storm is until you weather through it. You don't know what the results are going to be afterwards once that storm passes through. Um, and it's really easy to focus on the resiliency, but it's also a little bit, what's the word? Desensitizing, right? Because when you're in survival mode for so long, it's really hard to allow yourself to feel emotions, right? And really be in them. And so I think when I am going through the storm, it is a very mm, realistic reminder of my humanness, right? And my humanity, and this idea that even if you think you have it all under control, even if you feel like, oh, I've done one before, I can survive another one, it's also completely okay to feel this sort of lostness, right? The uncertainty as you're going through the storm, and just allowing yourself to, kind of be in that moment, right? And I feel like a lot of the times when we are in a hurricane, we're usually messaging our friends and talking about it. And oh my God, do you feel it over there? And so this idea that even in something so unpredictable and something so outside of our control, there is still a community and a network of people that we lean on, right? And so for me, as I think about it now, I think about how I feel during a hurricane, right? And even though there's all this craziness and there's this preparation and a lot of stress that revolves around it, when we're actually going through the storm, there's an odd calmness to it as well, because we all know that we're going through it. And so the only thing you can do is just accept it and deal with the consequences of whatever whatever the storm leaves behind afterwards. But as you're going through it, right? Like you're talking to friends, you're choosing to share in an experience and try your best to make light of the situation. um and so it's just a really nice reminder of just humanity, right? And how we kind of just come together, and how it's okay to just feel, be okay with the things that you cannot control, right? And just have a peace inside you, that even if if you come out and the storm has hit horribly, that there's always that opportunity for rebuilding, right? And reconstructing, and just, it's not the end of the world, even though it looks like it very much so as you're going through it.
So there's something else that I wanted to add to this question. Couple of things, because Pam also triggered a memory for me. One of the most surreal experiences of a hurricane is the eye. Like when the eye passes over you, you've gone through probably the worst of the storm, right? Um, you've gone through something called the eye wall, which is the worst winds. Right after that, it's the peace. Nothing happens in the eye. There's sun sometimes, right? Like sun comes through for the eye. This is basically the point where the storm is circling around it. And the eye of Wilma, I will never forget. It was like a good 20 minutes or so of just, and again, this is my child mind, so take with a grain of salt if it was actually 20 minutes. um, it felt like I should have been at the beach. It was blue, 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 blue sky, not a single cloud. Sun, it was incredibly bright. And it was almost like an insult to, to have that be in the center when, 20 minutes ago it was gray and literally winds screeching and howling and rain that was like just batting against the windows and winds that were launching debris everywhere. And then in the center it was this blue serene thing. And I remember like just the silence in the eye was so significant. That's something that actually witnessing a hurricane, it was probably something that, I can close my eyes and revisit, and I am right now. And I even remember where I was sitting, where I was in my home when I looked at it. Like I'm there, right? I'm there on the second floor of like this Coconut Grove condominium townhouse, looking out of my sliding door, sitting on my dad's bed, looking up and just seeing this point of the storm where I told myself like, maybe it's almost over. And it was, because when you pass the eye, that's it. You're basically halfway, you know. And it was just this part of the anatomy of a hurricane that really always scares me, because I know when you're in the eye area, when you live in the circumference of where the eye is going, you're going to get the worst of the storm. And we got the worst of Wilma, you know. Um and the second thing that I was thinking of, which is what Pam was saying about communities. When Irma sorry, not Irma, when Wilma hit, I felt very much alone. It was me, my dad, my brother, and then we drove to my grandma's house, and then we checked on my grandma that also lived in Hialeah, and then we went home. That was it. We were very siloed, we were very on our own. Fast forward to Hurricane Irma, that was a whole different experience of community. I lived in a condominium. I mean, sorry, take that back. I lived in a duplex in like the in between areas of like Shenandoah, Coral Gables, that neighborhood, not too far from Little Havana. And my neighbors were on both sides impeccable, like members of our little community. They were the other duplex, right? And every like we saw each other before we huddled into our homes and waited out the storm. And then we came out and greeted each other. They made us coffee off of their like gas burner. They made Cuban coffee every morning, brought it over to us. We had breakfast outside together almost every morning because my brother had um a propane barbecue. He would cook for them. We would share everything. They would go to the grocery market and they would bring back whatever they found because, of course, it was stripped bare from the hurricane and there were no trucks coming in yet. So it was very little supply in the supplies in the grocery markets. And we would cook that. We would open up our cans, make some hash, whatever. And sometimes it was just like, oh, we have leftovers. We want you to have it. And they would treat us the same way. My neighbors that lived in the front duplex of the house made for the first time ever guava burgers for me on their propane barbecue. And I was like, this, how have I not lived in Miami without a guava burger before. So Hurricane Irma was the first time I had a guava burger, and it's because my neighbor, of course, took like all neighbors took part in this kind of like potluck sharing food, and it was the best experience living in Miami, which is so ironic because it was the worst. It's the worst possible natural disaster that's part of living in Miami. And it brought out the best in both of those neighbors and in us because we also, shared whatever we found. They shared their generator with us. Do you know how, like, what a hot commodity that is when they shared their generator? And just to, like, charge our phones and use a fan or two in the house. And that's what that neighborhood was like. It was a good, like, maybe 2 weeks of that, I think, living without power and, like, just waiting for delivery trucks and power line companies to come down and help with repairs. And I remember like the entire neighborhood came out when we saw a Pike Power Company truck working on our lines. Everybody tended to those men. They were like, "Do you need water?" They took care. They were like, "Please tell me you're going to get it back on tonight." And those guys were like, "We don't know. We're going to try. We don't even know what's causing it." And they were telling us, like, we're not even from Florida, we're from Texas, and we're like, well, we're glad you're here. And by the way, that's what happens, right? When an entire state or a tri-county area loses power, all of these contracts start coming into play. FPL's reaching out to other states, and they're coming in, and I remember those two men that were on that Pike truck were telling us, like, man, it really sucks to be you guys right now, but this is the best we've ever been treated. And they left and they had water, and we did not get our power back that night, but we got it 2 days after. um and it was just incredible. That type of, like, you could have easily thought an entire neighborhood coming out to, like, greet two men on a truck would have turned very ugly, especially if they didn't get their power back. But it was such a, like, I guess a shared joke of the amount of suffering we're going through. Everybody knows everybody's miserable. There's no AC. It's hot. Everybody has their doors and their windows open. Everybody's talking to each other. They're yelling at each other. They know someone's cooking. It was the
It's like
worst and the best.
it's like cathartic comedic relief.
Honestly, it really was. It really was. Yeah, the icing on the cake was the thickness of those Texans' accent. It was so funny. It was yeah, I look back at that aftermath of Irma very lovingly, and I always told myself, like, once the power comes back on, we're gonna lose this, because we're all out here again because cathartic suffering, cathartic comedy of our suffering, but and of course, power came back on. We all went back inside, and we didn't really have that experience again. I'll never forget that time though. That was really the full color and sharedness of, like, people in Miami for me. And kind of brings it back to or kind of brings it to the end of our conversation here. With these experiences, with this note of survival and fortitude and ability and, memory, how do we feel it has changed us? How do we feel we have benefited from these experiences right today? I think for this question, I'll start for sure because I'm just going to lean into what I was just talking about. I learned from these experiences not to take community for granted. I remember as well that people can be really ugly as well as beautiful and colorful and there for each other. One does not cancel out the other. In that same Irma experience, right? I was at home and my neighbors were good to me and really amazing. They were amazing to me. And then I would go out, and I remember specifically like seeing a pregnant woman, at least 6 or 7 months pregnant, put everything she possibly could into a handbasket in a Winn-Dixie and push it with her foot out of the door. She was just trying to get as much as she could with her obvious, like, condition of being pregnant and not being able to pick that up, pushing it with her foot out of the door. And it was a heavy thing, right? It was not just a couple of cans. It was like a whole case of water, cans, like dried bags of lentils, all these things. And I remember seeing that and I froze, because it wasn't her that shocked me. It was the fact that I was seeing her and everyone moving around her, and she just continued on being basically overlooked. And then I was with my brother in a Winn-Dixie, and I turned to him and I said, I'm gonna go talk to her. And he's like, what are you gonna do? And I said, I'm just gonna put her stuff in our cart, because we had a shopping cart. And he looked, because he followed my eyes to see, because he didn't know who I was talking about. And then when he followed my gaze, he's like, oh yeah, you should go talk to her. And I went up to her and I said, can I help you? I know you I know you can't, you can't lift this up, and we have a cart. I can put it in there. And she looked at me like her shoulders sagged. She could have cried in front of me. And she was like, yes, thank you, please. My car isn't that far away, I promise. And I'm like, no, you're fine. And I told her my brother's just paying, but once he's done, like, I'll put your stuff in the car and we'll take you to the car. And we did. And she was so thankful. And she told us a million times, thank you. And I think I could be that way because my community had shown me that kindness. I don't know if I would have been any different to those people passing by and kind of having tunnel vision and just going for the water, going for the toilet paper, going for whatever they needed, right? And it's no fault of their own, but that's just kind of what this type of situation can do to a person. And it's always nice to remember that do the harder thing. Break out of your tunnel vision and challenge yourself to really see what's going on and help where you can. Because if you're just absorbed into what you need to do, what you need to grab, you'll lose sight of a much larger picture that we're drawing, for the world if we don't care about each other. So I remember her face so distinctly. I remember telling her, stay safe. I remember her telling me, like, we're gonna get through this. It's okay. We're gonna get through this. And I walked away from that Winn-Dixie and I just started crying in the car with my brother. And he was like, she's okay. She's okay. Are you okay? Why are you crying? And I just told him, I don't know. I just felt something really, like I just did something really difficult. And I don't know why, because it didn't feel difficult at all, but it happened. And I came back to my home. I came back to my community. I was greeted by my neighbors. They were sitting out in their front porch and they were like, oh, did you find anything? How was with Dixie? And, we were sharing our crazy stories. And my brother even told them, what happened. And they were telling, like, yeah, we've seen some crazy people try and do crazy things. This old woman was trying to like carry a case of water by herself, and again, it's like, yes, this all brings out a great time of struggle for us. Hurricanes do that, but we're going to struggle more if we don't look out for each other. And it's not to cover each other or save someone from something, but it's just to reach out when you can, because you can. I promise you can. Even if you think you can't solve, if you can't save someone from catastrophe, you can save them from, you know, a very heavy handbasket. And that'll make the difference. It will. That has definitely changed me. Hurricanes, natural disasters, things that just kind of like within reason can get you to kind of zoom in on like, oh my God, what am I going to do for myself? How am I going to take care of myself? Yes, all of that, still do that. That's cautious, that's good. But when you're out and you're doing these things, everyone around you is trying to do the same thing. And as much as you would want help for yourself to do that, be that hand, because whatever you give into this universe, you receive tenfold. And I really do believe in karma, in that exact message of energy given returns to you. And I always joked around with my brother and said, like, we got our power back 2 days later because I helped that pregnant woman with her with her handbasket, and that was the joke. But I really do believe there's a domino effect out there, and it dropped into what I put out and what it gave back to me. Yeah.
I'm still trying to think of mine.
It was a long pause. I was like, did I lose you guys?
No, we're still here. I would say that I don't know. I feel I believe what I'm about to say, but I feel like it might be a controversial thought, which is why it's so good that I'm going to explain it. Which is, I think for me, the biggest benefit right now when I think about everything that we've talked about today, it's the reminder that I choose my environment. I believe in the poem Invictus, right? I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And so if that's true, then that means that I've chosen to put myself in every situation that I've been in. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a part of my fate, and a part of where I'm supposed to be. I just also think that I have more of a say in that, and especially like talking about those last storms, right? And how I was an adult for them. And even like in high school, right? Still feeling like I had some leadership in the home with taking care of ourselves. I think that it's very much so up to me to decide what safe means to me, to keep myself safe, to protect myself, and then also like to extend a bit of my frame of thinking on what Tess was sharing. Like, it's my choice to help, and it's my choice to be a support system to other people. And I think that's probably something that stands out to me more right now, like not necessarily the choice to protect myself, but when do you cross that threshold and be a leader and a helper and a good Samaritan to the people that you love and just the people who are around you? I think that it's a really important lesson for people to learn and practice. And I think that when we're younger, it's a lot easier because it's, believe it or not, in the public educational system here in Miami, I do still feel like my teachers gave me a thorough understanding of what it means to be a good neighbor and what it means to be an upstanding member of the community. I don't think it was in the school curriculum, but I think that I had teachers who genuinely cared, about raising good people. And I think that it was instilled in me, in grade school to be respectful and to be mindful and to be thoughtful. And when you're an adult, you're kind of left to your own devices. And then that's when we see the worst parts of people, because you see the people who are embittered, who feel like they've been stepped on, who feel like they've been used, and maybe in their own right they have. I just think that feel and choice are some important things to look at in there too, and so that's why I would say that that's the biggest benefit, I think, from this topic, this discussion, weathering the storms, and what happens when you come out of them, is just recognizing that even in those moments where you feel completely helpless, like to take a step back and recognize, like, I still chose to put myself in this situation, which shouldn't be a bad thing because it means that I can navigate my way out of this situation if I manifested it myself. I think that there's a lot of reclaiming your power in there, and it's it's a great life lesson because I think it is lifelong, of learning what even is the power that you're trying to step into. Because I think that the more you step into your power, the more power you realize that you have. And the same can be said with being a good Samaritan. You don't realize how many people that you're capable of helping until you help the first one.
And
Yeah.
it's a good feeling. It's a good feeling. It doesn't feel easy when you do it because you're shy and you don't know how to approach that stranger, but it feels good when it's done. I promise that. Sorry, Pam.
I think mine is gonna be a little bit of a 180.
Take us
um
there. Take us there.
yeah, so I, hearing the both of you talk about physical hurricanes, right? Because as I've mentioned, like my memory of hurricanes overall is not the best. But when I think about um I guess personal hurricanes, right, that I've had to deal with in my life, and what the chaos, confusion, and fear that real hurricanes and storms like that kind of instill in us, and how that still translates with the metaphysical version of hurricanes. I feel like I'm usually that one, right? That person who says, who will prepare ahead of time, right? Or will invite their home to other people to come over and weather the storm with me here. And I feel like I'm usually the person who takes on all of the extra that the people that are closest to me have in the past, not, it was their decision to not prepare well. But in part of that decision has been because Pam's got it, right? So it's almost like with a lot of these storms, you would assume, right, in a household or whatever, in a community, everyone has their part to play in preparing for that disaster. And so I feel like this kind of storms that I've gone through have the way that in the ways that they've changed me is to understand when to draw the line and to say, I can't do that for you, or I can't carry that for you because I need to take care of myself first, and understand that I'm going to be okay. And so it's a little bit different in the sense of, like, of course, yes, when you're out there and you see strangers struggling, do the best that you can to help out, especially in a time that is so chaotic and there's so much fear. But for me personally, the way I feel that the metaphorical way that storms have affected my life and how they've changed them, and how I've compared them before in this episode, right? Like, they're things that I see that they're coming, right? There's small signs, and been it's been iterations of similar storms, right? Different names, different levels, different intensities. And each time I feel that, I'm prepared, or I'm capable of carrying more of the load. And each time the storm teaches me, you know, that's not okay. And you should only be responsible for your own, not other people's. that if you have that extra capacity and if those people are appreciative of it, then, go ahead and help them. But it's not a requirement. And in the same way that you're willing to help somebody else out through a storm, they should also help you out, and if they're always the ones that are just, oh, I'm not going to worry about it because I know that my neighbor next door is always going to have water, you know then that's not okay. And I feel like the idea of hurricanes and storms have taught me that in my life personally, and with some of the people that I've had to weather through, right? And kind of finally um outgrown, right? I've now I trust that those weather predictions and those forecasts, that the little signs that the universe tries to show me in terms of whether I should steer clear of somebody or something like that, or or a scenario, and it's been little things, and it's one of the hardest things for me, I think, to kind of step back and not feel like I have to fix everything, and not feel like I have to be there for that person. It's like, no, you know what? In the same way that I have grown up and have become an adult, these people are also adults, right? And they are more than capable of going out and getting their own gas and getting their own provisions and making sure that they have their waters. You know, if something terrible happens to their home, you know, they've done all the prep work that that they could do. That was something outside of their control. You want to help them, okay, but that doesn't mean that you are responsible for making sure that they get all of the things that they need. That you even go out and get that for them, especially when, um, you know, in storms, people can get really nasty. That fear. There's different ways that people react to that fear and the uncertainty, and so understanding how to shape that environment in a way that will be also beneficial to me, right? Um so yeah, a little bit. My hurricane took a little turn to the other path. But that's definitely how it's changed me, and it's really helped me become the person that I am now, and have healthier boundaries with people, and with the kinds of way that I overinvest myself in ways that I felt in the past, the kinds of storms that I've weathered through. The same sort of theme has been trying to highlight to me this path that I am being taken for granted, or I'm not being, the person that I am, the kinds of things that I do, that I've done for certain people in my life, they were not appreciated. And you will find other people, it may feel like the end of the world and there was such a huge path of destruction, and how is this home going to be rebuilt? Um, but it happens, and that's okay. And it's only to clear a path, for something better to come, right? After Andrew, after all of these horrible hurricanes, there have been improvements in the way that we build our structures in Miami. There have been plans that have been made to try and lessen flooding and do things like that, and replace windows with impact windows and have these shutters. And so it's just that understanding that there is loss in life, but that doesn't mean we can't recover from it, and recover to something that is potentially better. Um, that it doesn't necessarily mean it's a complete end. And it almost reminds me of that cycle, right, of life and death, and trying to tie it in terms of the spiritual and the esoteric, uh, everything, right? Duality, Ouroboros, just the idea of even the last episode that we did, right? Shadow work. Um, with the good comes the bad, but in the reverse as well, with the bad comes the good. So just understanding that, and understanding how I can just learn from it, right? And not dwell on it so much, has been some of the ways that it's changed me.
I always love and appreciate how different, and and there's always an underlying like joint there with our perspectives, and there's no like mistake in that, right? I feel like we have all come from these shared experiences, even with like living in completely different regions and having very different experiences, but all with, an underline, right? But very different experiences, very different outcomes. And that's, I think, just a big reminder to everybody listening. I hope that's what exactly, feeds into your perspective, maybe having a very similar one to one of us, and always catching on and building, right? Maybe upon what you already think or what you're starting to feel, right? Maybe some intuition there speaking to you. And there's also always a lesson in looking back and valuing what has happened, even if it's not by your design, right? Hurricanes are never by our design. There's a wonderful, magnificent, powerful, uh, all knowing whatever behind it. And, it comes when it comes and it brings what it brings. And we have to adapt and we have to learn and build, new concrete walls, reinforced windows, in a very literal and metaphorical sense, right? Protecting ourselves better from what we have come out of. And with that, I want to thank Kat, want to thank Pam for diving into what is a strange mix of the very literal and the very abstract, right, of the storms that have definitely come across our paths and scared us a lot and taught us a lot and made us appreciate the things that we have a little bit more. And without further ado, going to turn it over to Pam because she's going to get us started on a very new and very, very nice looking way of tarot today. Take it away,
This is so
Pam.
exciting.
Okay, so I am trying to play around with the Zoom sharing options here. Hopefully you guys can see this. So, for this read, um, I feel like a lot of what we mentioned, right, in terms of hurricanes, is the idea of all these different emotions. Like that really stood out to me in this episode, right? We've highlighted a lot in terms of fear, in terms of the unknown, in terms of uncertainty, in terms of loss. And so, even in the stories that we were saying and kind of reliving, right? What are some ways that we can help out? What are the different reactions that we've noticed, the different ways that people have handled um, hurricanes and their own personal storms? I feel that I want to ask the cards, any advice that might have of what can help either ground us or snap us out of that fight or flight, that survival mode, that fear, uh, making decisions based off of fear versus thinking clearly about certain outcomes. And so, in this episode, because we were doing it virtually, I had wanted to experiment with a different type of deck. I actually found this online, it was an Instagram ad, and it's a browser, a web based tarot program called Moonlight. This is completely not sponsored. I just found it. I thought it was a really great resource when I was playing with it a little bit. As you'll see once I do the read, it also has a little guidebook, some notes that help you. So if you're in the process of learning tarot, you don't have the money to get a tarot deck, this is completely free. They have a few actually different decks offered for free, as well as some other decks that you can buy that I thought was really cool. You can even have this as like a room. um I have my audio and video muted for that one, but if you wanted to do a tarot read with a friend, you wouldn't even need to have any extra program. You could just do it on this website, right? So having said all of that, as if it were a promo, I'm just shuffling the cards right now. And so I'll just repeat again, if there's anything, any insights the cards have in terms of what are some ways that we can kind of navigate, right? Or regulate some of our emotions when we are in these tumultuous times in our life. How can we kind of settle that, right? Settle the quietness of the storm so we can really understand what we have to focus on, whether it is to survive or to get to the next step or just to weather through the storm, right? Let's see what they have to say. Okay, so I did not pick this spread, but I think this will work out. Persona, obstacle, solution. I think I'm feeling this one. All right. So we can flip these. So if you see here on the side, right, we have some of the hints and some descriptions. So for persona, we have Two of Wands, seeing the full picture, exploring plans, surveying, and coordination. For obstacle, we have the Fool, and here they say leap of faith, spontaneity, unknown lands, and release of fear. And then for solution, we have Knight of Cups, reserved in feelings, quietly appreciating things, slow paced, rich inner life. Okay. So what does that mean in terms of what I asked the cards? The Two of Wands, this is fire energy. Usually it's associated with the idea of exploration, right? And here it says exploring plans, surveying, coordinating. So I feel that a lot of the times, right, when things come out that we're so fearful of, we tend to have this reaction of either all the things we have to prepare to make sure, right, that we succeed, or a negative reaction of listing all of the possible negative outcomes that could happen as a result to that fear, right? And seeing the Two Wands there, you have the guy who's holding it with the world in his hand, but there's another staff behind him that is completely freestanding, you know. And what's really standing out to me is that, right, is the idea that he's holding the staff, he's holding the world. And a lot of the times I think that we react to fear in negative ways because it feels like we are losing control or we are out of control, and we are so used to, as human beings, right, even a lot of the ways that we view success and things like that is having control of certain things, having control of your finances, having control of, your family in some cases, having control on your kids, what that means to be a good parent, that they're obedient, whatever it is. Um, and so when things get out of our control, or an event happens in our life that we're not expecting, and then it ignites this fear response, right? The first thing we focus on is that lack of control. And I think that what the cards are really trying to let us know is don't focus on what you can't control, right? And don't focus so much on trying to control, because in that need and that want to control, it comes from not being able to control whatever that obstacle might be, right? And so if you're focusing so much on that, you are going to miss the whole point of what this thing is, that it's trying to show you. It's almost like you have to take a step back, right? A lot of even some of the things that we've said now, it's been very retrospective, reflective, kind of seeing and even making connections as we were speaking, right? Seeing the ways in which our experiences have made some connections for us. And so I think that the cards are asking us to take a step back, right? Release things, let go. It's also very on par with the last episode that we have with the idea of manifestation, right? You work on it, you can do as much as you can, but after that, you kind of have to let things be and see where they fall. And even if they don't fall where they thought they were, that you wanted them to, that's okay, because at the end of the day, what it's asking us, right? For the obstacle, we have the Fool. And the Fool is usually, right, associated with this idea of a fresh start, of somebody who's young and naive, and has this fresh look on life and wanting to live life to the fullest, right? We have leap of faith, spontaneity. This guy isn't even looking at the floor, doesn't even notice that he's on the edge of a cliff. This dog is next to him being like, yo, homie, you're about to fall. And he's just like, wow, look at the sky, look at the roses, right? I even kind of sort of see a little bit the mountain range behind him, for whatever reason, reminds me of a tsunami. And the sun behind him reminds me of like what Tess was saying earlier, and seeing that how it was laughable that the eye of the storm looked like she could have gone out to the beach, right? And so it's like, this too shall pass is what comes up to me, right? That it will, and obviously we've been talking about this idea of fear and how it can have a control of you. But a key word that pops out here for this app is release of fear. And it also mentions unknown lands. And so it's acknowledging the idea that this feels scary to you, even with, what Kat's anecdote with the friend of hers who was terrified of hurricanes. It's coming because you just don't know, right? And what you don't know is really scary, because it's a lot more secure to take the leap on something that you'll know the outcome of, but there is no growth there, right? As we've talked about, every single hurricane that we've gone through, that we've lived through, there's things that we've learned. There's things that, the Miami infrastructure here has learned about hurricanes and how to better set up buildings. There's things that we've learned about ourselves. We've talked about how storms have evolved us and have changed us. But if we don't take that time to make sure that we let go of that fear, it's going to prevent us from possibly seeing a different opportunity come to light, right? If we are so scared of moving to that different place, um, because of whatever the reason might be, you don't know what opportunities that would bring you. And for the solution, we have the Knight of Cups. And here, what stands out to me is this idea of quietly appreciating things, right? This is something that I feel that we are always advocating for, constantly practicing in our podcast, this idea of reflection, this idea of gratitude. And, it mentions here slow paced, reserved in feelings, rich inner life. The Knight of Cups, very similar to the Knight of Pentacles, it's a lot more slow moving, right? It's not as fast. The horse doesn't look like he's like it's leaping, or it's running, or that it's in action. This one looks like it's walking, right? The Knight of Pentacles, usually the horse looks completely still. But this knight has to, like, as he's riding a horse, which if you've ever ridden a horse, that thing will, like, you'll be jumping and moving, and your ass will hurt afterwards from all the times that you're bouncing on the horse. But he has to do that while holding a chalice in his hand that is more likely than not filled with water in there. And so it's this idea that just take that moment, right? Take that time to just maybe, like, focus on your breathing, research some breath work, and understand that even if something bad happens, things will be okay, right? Understanding and appreciating, like, okay, there's a hurricane out there, but how fortunate am I that I get to have a roof over me, right? Versus some people who might have to handle this without a roof over their heads. Or even if, you've lost something, oh my God, but at least I had something to lose, right? It's this idea that we mentioned the word catharticism, right, in this podcast episode. And I think that one of the ways that we can kind of handle things that are really scary, and just storms that we don't know what's going to happen at the end of it, is just counting your blessings, right? Taking the moment and allowing yourself the patience and the grace to release that fear, to let things be, to understand that it's not the end of the world, that even if there is destruction, there is also recovery afterwards. Even after a forest fire, the soil gets rich. It's devastating. You lose so much forest, but the forest grows, right? Like the natural process of life is that after death comes life. It's a complete and continuous cycle. And so I think that the cards are, just reminding us of that. And there's a lot of cards that could come out in tarot that are a lot more negative, right? Or potentially negative. And I feel that the cards that came out with a topic that I think cripples a lot of us, right? Fear can be very crippling. The cards decided to show us a little bit more optimism with the Fool coming out, right? It came out in the obstacle, but it's still this idea that it may look like an obstacle, but it's not really. This Fool doesn't care. He's still joyful and carefree. And so release that fear, release that need for control, release that fear from controlling you, and just go quietly through the storm. Sit there. There's not much else you can do. Maybe the wires go down, the powers goes out. There's not a lot. You might talk to your friends if you're lucky. You can talk to people who are in the house with you, but you just kind of have to go through it. And then once you go through it, you'll realize at the end of it that it wasn't as scary as you thought it was going to be. And I feel like that's very indicative of just how life is, right? There's a lot of things that can scare us, a lot of things that can prevent us from moving back or from living our lives. And I think that the cards are encouraging us that it's okay. It's not as big of a deal as you think it is. You know, it's a little scary. You got to get there with this glass of water, and if a few droplets come out, we even kind of, that even alludes to our last episode, right? The idea, if you guys haven't heard it yet, Tess mentioned that her therapist was talking about, why does that, when you get so close to the end, why does it feel so scary, right? Even bringing up this idea of fear again is because now you're walking with a glass that is so full, you know? And so it's terrifying to think of the possibility of just dropping all of that and losing it. But your glass got full, you filled it. If it falls, guess what? You can fill it up again. It's okay. So I feel like that's what the cards have for us tonight, today, this morning, whenever you're listening to us. And let me see if I can figure out how to stop sharing. Here we go. There we go.
Thank you, Pam, as always. And ultimately, reminding us that sometimes our weakest and strongest obstacles can be ourselves. So it's always a good reminder.
Literally, look at me looming
I
over you.
know. I
All
know.
hail.
Yeah.
All
no.
hail the almighty Pam.
Yes. And honestly, before I say any final notes and we sign off, I'd love to open it to all of us again. And for any last reactions to the reading, any other further inspiration or insights we got from the reading, if you ladies like to share anything.
I thought that the reading was great, and I thought that for that being the first time of using that app/site, it seemed like, I mean, you would be a better judge, Pam, but for the ritual nature of tarot, I feel like they did keep all of the steps intact. So it did seem like it was curated based off of you and the cards that you picked, which I thought was really nice.
Yeah, and the people who created it are people who practice tarot. So I feel like that's what makes it really, really a really good program as well, is even when I was playing around with it, like they have different spreads, right, that are there. It's not just the one that showed up, even though I didn't pick it, but it picked us. But they do have other spreads on there. They have other decks, and they have a lot of good resources built into the site itself that I think worked out incredibly well for our read today. And yeah.
Thank you, ladies. Oh, go ahead, Kat.
No, that was it.
Oh,
It was a
okay.
great read. No, it was a great read, and I also, I don't know, something small, but I love how we always do these tarots because I think that so many of our listeners, you all listen at whatever time is suitable for you. And what I think is so unique about both the practice of tarot and life in general is that messages come to you when you need them. So even just giving that reminder, of like, this is what the cards have to say to you, is like, if you're not listening to this on the day that we release the episode, just know that we're not recording the episode on the day that it's being released, And so, like, our message for today is your message for tomorrow, the next week, the next month, whenever you hear it, and just trusting that divine timing, which is a lot of what the read was about.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think I love hearing people go back, from, what they're listening to now versus when, we started releasing episodes a year ago. It's always insightful because some of them catch on now and then they're like, "Oh, actually this one episode that I listen to now, it's perfect for me right now." And there's a reason for that. Yeah. Without further ado, I want to thank again my co-host here. I really am so appreciative and so grateful that we're really entertaining these challenging conversations and also opening them up for our listeners to connect to them and just again provoke more insights, provoke more reflection into something similar that they've lived through or something similar that they quite literally also lived through maybe alongside with us and have the same experience as a lot of us, a lot of our listeners I'm sure are also can recall the same hurricane names that we threw out there today. But without further ado, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for tuning in to High Tea Mystique. We'll have more for you coming soon. Tune in, as always, to Spotify, our YouTube channel. Comment, share with us. Tell us about your teas. I promise I still want to hear about them. I said that at the beginning and I'll say it now. But without further ado, good morning, good evening, and good night to all of you listening.
Bye.
Bye.